Well, thank you for suggesting this. And Penny, I think I want to start with asking you how did you happen to film it? I think you had worked with Mailer on Maidstone, right? And he asked you to
I
film
shot 3
it?
or 4 films. Norman kept thinking that he could make money with these films. He'd make these films and he'd disregard all filming techniques known to man. And of course, his manager would say, "You just lost some huge amount of money. I'm not going to let you do it anymore." And he would sneak off and try to do another one. But Maidstone was his idea of a big film. And he thought finally they'll recognize that this is an important film. And unfortunately that didn't happen. So he was very depressed about filmmaking, as far as I know.
Then he came to, right, he heard about, he was invited to this event and he asked if you wanted to film it.
Yeah, did he ask you to film this, right?
Yes, yes. Well, I had filmed a couple of things that she had done. She would have a little loft downtown, and she would have some interesting person come in, and then she would get a lot of people would come to listen. And I filmed a couple of them because I thought the people were kind of interesting. And it's, you know, you have a choice when you want to make a film about somebody. You can either go and interview them, which to me is sort of boring for everybody, or you can find a place where they're actually speaking their mind and watch them. And when you have that, you try to take advantage of it.
And this one was definitely a speaking of the mind moment.
Well, I had no idea how it would come out, of course, but I suspected that it would be kind of boisterous.
Did you have? You didn't have any permits. You just went in and shot it, or?
We not only didn't have a permit, but the guy who was managing the theater kept trying to throw us out of the grills. And that's why I finally went on stage, because I thought he wouldn't dare come up on stage. But yeah, he even tried to turn the lights out so we couldn't film. But then everybody screamed at him, so he had to come back home.
This happened in '71, and you filmed it in '71, and the film was not edited and made until '76 when
That's right.
Chris, and it was the first thing you and Chris did together. So Chris, how did you rescue this footage that was laying there?
Yeah, it was one of the first things that I did when I first started working with Penny. He had a whole wall of films that he had shot and never edited, so we started going through that. I think this was like the 3rd or 4th film that we did from that, and you know, he took it down and showed it to me, and you know, I was just really, you know, so fascinated by it because you know, all these women were really, you know, heroes of mine and so important in the women's movement. And at the same time, it was just, you know, such an uproarious event, and there was just so much sexual tension going on between Norman and Germaine, and I really wanted to try to edit it so that you really felt like you were there and kept the spirit of it. I mean, the problem for me was it was like the worst shot thing, as you can see, ever. So, you know, the coverage was very, very spotty, and, you know, it was just difficult to, you know, form it into a film, and especially cut the, you know, the women's speeches, because the event was probably about twice as long. And, you know, they're kind of formidable women to, like, cut their, you know, their art, in a sense, down. So, you know, that was one of the challenges from doing it.
You're younger than the women. What was the women for you at the time?
What was the what?
What were those women for you at the time? Were they?
I mean, they were women when I, you know, was younger, when I was in college, that, you know, were very important. And, you know, the interesting thing was that the women's movement by '76, when I did this, it was quite fractured in a sense because of the, you know, the lesbian and radical parts of the movement were one thing, and, you know, the other part of the movement wanted to, like, be more, you know, normalized in certain ways, kind of keep their base, and there was a lot of infighting and stuff. So I felt it was very different from that event by the time I did it, but kind of as a historical event, I thought it was incredibly important. And yeah, We had them all come see it, of course. So when Norman saw it, he walked in and said, well, this is the night that Jill Johnson turned my hair gray. And by then his hair was totally white. And, he said, he had no clue about the women's movement. He was, probably the stupidest person on earth about it. And he felt like he, looked like an idiot there in a lot of ways, even though he's playing the devil's advocate and, being, Norman Mailer in a sense. But in some ways, he couldn't have been more gracious in coming to watch it and kind of giving his consent to put it out there. And, all the different participants came to see it. Jermaine came, and she came with like a whole group of her women friends, and they kind of swept in and watched the film, and she thought she was wonderful and left. And then Jill did not see the film until we showed it, and it was the first screening we showed it at the Whitney Museum, and she came with her girlfriend, and she said to me, I was the best thing there, wasn't I, Chris? You were good. And she watched up until she did her thing, and then she left again. But subsequently, Jill came to several screenings with me of the film through the decades, and she told me of all the other types of things she wanted to do that night to disrupt the event. She thought of things like having a whole water balloons and a net above, and she would drop them on the audience, and wear a boxing glove because of Norman and his whole thing, and all sorts of stunts. But I don't know. I think she was an incredible person, Jill Johnson, in a lot of ways.
She was a star of the evening.
Penny, you already filmed when you did this, Don't Look Back and Monterey Pop, and this reminds me, maybe because you were on stage of some of your concert films. So how much for you both as filmmakers this was interesting as a performance piece, because the performance quality is so incredible, and obviously there was a degree of theatrics that was going on in the alchemy of the people on the panel.
Well, the manager of the theater chasing you, that changes a little bit. You do
Talk into the mic.
it's hard to. Like Norman, I had no clue about women's what they were talking about. It was to me just a kind of an assembly of people, and there would be some interesting people there, so I wanted to do it. But when Chris came to see me, she was looking for a job, and unfortunately, I had just gone bankrupt, I think. And so there was nobody but me and a friend who were sort of holding the office together. And I talked to her for about an hour, and I thought, this is exactly the person who should edit this film, because if I edit it, I'll go for the laughs. And I didn't want to be a laugh generator for women's liberation. That did not suit my mind at the time. So I took her into our little editing space there, and I said, here's the film, you might start working. Well, actually I didn't. I said, no job, and she went home. And the next morning, I dared call her up and say, actually, we might have something here for you to do. Because I didn't want to let her ever leave the office. And I gave her the film to edit, and she sat down at a steam deck that didn't work very well. And she did edit it, so I was very grateful to her. And we became partners ever since.
I think for me, one of the challenges was to make people feel like they were really there, and keep in things that I would probably cut out now, like swish pans and senses that you would really feel like you were part of the audience in a lot of ways. But I don't know. I mean, it just, for me, it's really something for the time capsule still, but very relevant at the same time, and really interesting to see now. The Worcester Group, which I don't know if any of you know, the Worcester Group, which is a theater group in New York, just took Town Bloody Hall and made a kind of a performance piece around it called the Town Hall Affair, where they do kind of some of the extraordinary acting things that they do in some of their other plays, where they have Town Bloody Hall on monitors, and then the actors voice in perfect sync, Norman Mailer or Jermaine Greer, whoever the person is on the screen, And, they kind of take it to another level, and they first started previewing it last year, and in Los Angeles when we were there, the theater wanted to show Top Bloody Hall, and we showed it, and, it was really, I thought, like, nobody is really going to go see this film, but, it seemed so relevant because all the Trump accusations had just come out, and, it seemed like a film that could really be shown again. And kind of one of our challenges with films that are as old as this film is to kind of restore it, preserve it. And that's, really what I would like to do with this footage, because beyond being rough in the way that it was shot and the conditions under which Penny shot it, is just to kind of go back to the 16mm film and restore it in a digital way again.
I think the rule for me for any, whether it's a musical event or an event like this, the rule is always get the face as big as you can in the frame of the camera. And everything else, general movements of audiences, you try to ignore. But people want to see who's talking. And a lot of times, like, some of you may remember Betty Friedan, who used to live here. I used to have talks with her in Scavone's. And she and I were great pals. She was very surprised to see me there with the camera. But the fact is that faces is what talk to you, and not movements of not parades down the street, that's all. So that's kind of why it's shot so frenetically as it is. And why I'm on stage is to avoid the manager.
Was anybody at this event that's here? Okay.
The manager came.
What?
She was Betty Friedan's assistant.
We ran the Sag Harbor initiative in this school, I believe 1984, 1985, I don't know if anybody remembers.
A little later.
It was a 3-day conference which was led by Betty Friedan, and she brought in speakers on different topics from all over the country. And the purpose of that conference was not exactly feminism at the time. It was more to bring the black and white communities together here in Sag Harbor. That was the initial impetus of that conference. But having worked for a long time with Betty, I have to say that she had a terrible reputation for how she dealt with other women. And I was one of them.
She was great at Scavone's.
But we also have Hillary Loomis here, who wrote a very highly regarded Norma Mailer book. Were you at this event?
I wasn't. No, I wish I had been. That's why I interviewed you guys.
And anybody here was at that event?
You can
You get a reward.
You can find it on YouTube. It was filmed by CNN, and I found it quite recently. It's called the Sag Harbor Initiative, and there it is.
One thing that has really struck me looking at the film yesterday, again, it's the power of the ideas and the joy that the people on the panel have in debating each other, and it seems like I was having a hard time thinking of any similar cultural debate that goes on right now or hasn't gone for many years. I mean, there is nothing so vivacious. There is really no desire, no playfulness, and no even serious cultural debate. Maybe there are people that yell at each other on cable television, but that's as deep as we get. And do you agree, and do you miss, but do you think that it would be important to restart a debate at those levels,
I think what you're saying is interesting, and other people have said that have seen the film, especially recently, and a lot of younger people, is that they never have had that type of situation where they've been in a group where that many people are really engaging together, and they miss that type of thing on social media, which I guess has some aspects of kind of coming together and voicing opinions, but it doesn't have the realness and the kind of theatricality that these type of theater for idea forums had back in
1-3.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. There.
Well, I don't really have a question except to say that it's a fantastic movie that should be used in the schools exactly to address the point that we don't have enough discussion and the young people don't understand. TV is not being a good impact. You know, if you look at the elections and how people debate on TV, but this should be mandatory at a school to be teaching people because it's a fascinating movie and it's so real. I think it could do a lot on the educational front.
Thank you. I hope we can do that.
You know, I think in 10 years, you will find that most schools will be making their own movies like this and showing them to themselves. And it would be probably the most efficient way of telling them what's going on. But they'll do it themselves. They won't have people have to come in and do it for them.
Yeah, but do you think that there are, because what's interesting here also is how provocative some of these ideas are. You know, some of them are almost paradoxical, but they still are just they're really daring. And I don't see a lot of daring ideas coming out of what we're discussing today, even when it's about, you know, what's going on with the Me Too movement. It seems less, I don't know, provocative, passionate, and no, I think it's passionate. I just think it's less original, and I don't know. I missed the force, you know, of this, and some of the things that the women say in the film are still incredibly valid, and it's, you know, so many years after.
I listening to Jermaine's speech. I remember at the time I thought she's got a speech made up that's going to try to impress everybody with her credentials. But you know, when I listened to it now, I thought, that's a fucking incredible speech. And I really was very moved by it. And I thought, you know, this is, what, 40 years after the event? It took me to take it in. But it was, she was right, absolutely right.
Well, the whole thing which they refer to the force and the, I mean, that's what we're discussing right now, I think, indirectly, but that's kind of what the debate is coming down to. So it's very, very interesting.
Well, that's a wonderful thing about filming people when they're in some kind of not amiable discussion, when they're trying to put forth whatever they believe, and in a sense, in a situation where they're not convinced it's going to be taken seriously. And when you look at it in film, you watch it in a different way than when you were there listening to it. And that's why film is so important when it watches and doesn't try to school.
I find it interesting that I think that today, listening to Mahler, we wouldn't, first of all, I think today we don't recognize a sense of humor like many of the people in that audience did. And I think even in this audience, probably, and even me at the beginning.
You think we've lost Norman, you mean?
Yeah, well, at the beginning of the film, I was very angry, and I leaned over to my friend and I said, I used to like Norman Mailer. And what I realized at the end of the film is he really was, of course, playing devil's advocate, and there is a certain level of humor and sarcasm of trying to make a point. But today, I think that is totally lost in discourse, and it's just a non-existent thing, that people would get so offended by some of what he said, and it would be a completely different kind of thing today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and you know, I think people are grappling with that in terms of kind of where this discussion is going today with sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, and you know, where to focus it. But yeah, I mean, Norman, I mean, he made me laugh so much when I was editing this film. I mean, he did so many funny little things where you hate him, and he's the biggest chauvinist pig, and then he goes over and he pours little glasses for each one, brings them all over, and I don't know, it just, you know, he's always playing with us in different ways, and you know.
You know, standing on that stage, trying to think who's the next person who's going to speak so I could get to them. And Norman started somewhere along in there, and I think it's not in it's cut a little bit from the film maybe, I don't remember now, but I got fascinated by what he was saying, so I started filming him just to hear what he was saying, and I kind of forgot I was making a movie. And I still remember that moment because it struck, whatever he said had struck me in some way, and I thought, I must know what he's talking about. And then I thought, I'll talk to him later, and I never got a chance to. It was one of those moments that it comes occasionally when you're not yourself, you're somebody else listening. And it was fascinating for me, because I still remember it, but I can't find it in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see now is kind of, a culture trying to come to terms, with its own indoctrinated, unconscious, a lot of times, attitudes towards women, towards, power, whatever. And I think you see a bit of that in the film, especially with Norman. I see him trying to come to terms with all of a sudden there. Norman was just such a person that identified so many movements that happened in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, from the counterculture to kind of the rise of the Black Power movement to conservatism starting in the Republican Party, but he seemed to somehow missed the entire women's movement there. And I think he's confronted with it in a way. He's trying to deal with things. He's trying to deal with things he did. He's talking all about hitting women, and Norman was somebody who shot his wife. So there's you see him coming to grips, I think, with it while he's talking. I found that very interesting.
One of the words that when we were trying to describe how they're different today, we would be different today than the way they were speaking. I was thinking we speak more apologetically today than
We as women.
yes, yes, and I feel like that that there was no apologies on that panel whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think women have learned. One of the things my observation is that things have changed so much, and you don't even realize how much they've changed. You forget how much they've changed, and yet they haven't changed in so many ways at the same time.
Yeah.
And however, the dialogue did change, make way for those changes. So perhaps the dialogue we're having now will be helpful to making some changes going forward.
Yeah.
Let's hope.
In conjunction with using the film for educational purposes, I think it would be really interesting to do that, but to hold parallel debates amongst the high school children who are seeing that film. Because what I think you're talking about is we have lost that eloquence. We don't know how to debate anymore. Admittedly, those speakers were highly educated and not sort of the normal folk, if you like. But the eloquence, the use of language, the referral to literature, the background knowledge, we do not have that today. And I guarantee that any debate on any topic today would break down in 5 minutes in cursing and fighting and yelling the same way it does all over social media.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the educational aspect, I do not believe that students today are given that kind of background with which to have such a debate.
I think it probably depends on where you are. I think that there are convocations similar to that taking place all the time, but we just aren't there.
A lot of breaking down in this too, and swearing and people leaving. So.
Yes.
Barbara?
Chris, thank you so much for bringing this to us, Mr. Pennebaker. You mentioned preservation, and since we're all here committed to preservation, are many of your films yet preserved? I believe you're very committed to that. Have you made any applications to have this film preserved?
The question is, because you're speaking softly, they're asking about how many of Chris and Penny's film has been preserved, and if this particular one has been already, there is already an application on it filed for its preservation.
That's our problem, is that we have maybe 100 films. Some of them not completed, some of them, I don't know where they are exactly all the time, but they're all up in Iron Mountain, because I worried from the beginning that they shouldn't turn into scattered ashes or something, and I wanted to go to a place where they'd be the best preserved. And our question is, then what happens to them? What happens to them in 20, 30 years? Do they still, is there a way to keep them alive? And we've started to spend more time on that than making new films, because I think it's so important. But
I mean, almost
it's
none of
kind of
our
terrifying.
films are preserved. Criterion, which I don't know if any of you know, is a really wonderful company that distributes a lot of independent foreign films. They've preserved a few of our films: Don't Look Back, Mare Pop, The War Room. But most of our films are not, and things change as time goes on. So they're all on all different formats, which is problematic through the years. But also, what we feel in terms of documentary films, as opposed to fiction films, is that the outtakes are also very valuable because they're a history of our times, whether they're interesting, to the subject, or maybe they're interesting to a geographer or a sociologist, or all sorts of people might be interested in that footage. So we have saved all of our outtakes of our films, which has been a huge burden. But as Penny said, we store them up at our mountain. They're not preserved there. They're just sitting in these caves that are a storage vehicle for a lot of people. But they're not at all preserved. And just as a matter of fact, this week I kind of was flashing back to the past, where some filmmakers came in and they were interested in doing a film on a man that we did a film about, John DeLorean, who made that gull-wing door stainless steel car that you see in the movies Back to the Future, if any of you watch those. So he wanted to go through all the outtakes of it. We still have one of our 16 millimeter flatbed editing machines. So, I spent
It doesn't work very
a few
well.
$1,000s fixing it. I could have bought a computer. And we went through the outtakes of that film together for a longer film about John DeLorean, who has had kind of an interesting rise and fall American history story.
So
I wish you could see a picture of Chris surrounded by rolls of film and tape, some of which is falling apart, and people are all looking, saying, what is all this? Where is all this coming from? And it's all John DeLorean, far more than we used in the making of the film. But I'm so glad I didn't have to go to the office that day, because they were trying to make the machine work and it didn't work. And I thought, somebody just wants to see a little bit of a film because they're interested in making a film about John DeLorean. And we probably have the only footage of him extending at Dunbury, where he had the factory in Ireland. And she has to be the one that figures out how to make the steam deck work again, which nobody has done for 30 years. And I feel so sorry for her, but I probably don't remember either. So it's scary.
So ideally you would like the films to be preserved, and also the outtakes to be made available to the public for studying and therefore to be
Yeah,
at least.
we're really looking for a place to take them, whether it's a university or a museum, whatever, to take our collection, which not only includes our films, but also a lot of equipment, because Penny engineered some of the very first synchronous sound 16 millimeter film equipment, and we have that and a lot of other parts of the history of documentary, really.
So, next project.
Yeah.
That's another
The
project.
Sag Harbor Partnership.
No, actually, the Sag Harbor Cinema for the Arts, there's some state grants, as you and I have spoken about, Giulia, that are coming up starting in January that can be applied for. And I think restoration, if a nonprofit, not the partnership, we don't have enough bandwidth in terms of volunteers, but the cinema group might lead the charge on trying to get some state and foundation money for the preservation of these films.
Yeah, we can look into that.
You know what, afterwards I'll talk to you personally, because I have some ideas for you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we want to thank you all for coming.